Can we please start with the roll call?
Commissioner Perry,
Present.
Commissioner Reed,
Here.
Commissioner Blanco,
Here.
Commissioner Peterson,
Present.
Commissioner Pritzel,
Here.
Commissioner Rawson,
Here.
Commissioner Vanderwaal, Senior Assistant City Attorney, here. Assistant Community Services Director, Armando Valdez.
Here.
Thank you. And so next on the agenda is public comment. This is an opportunity for anybody in the public to provide comment on our agenda or anything off the agenda, and you have up to 3 minutes. Are there any people that wish to make a comment? Okay, with that said, we will go ahead and close public comment and move on to item 4, which is approval of the agenda.
Vice Chair,
Madam Chair, I'll go ahead and make a motion to approve the agenda as submitted. This is Commissioner Carey.
Okay, we have a first. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. We have a first from Commissioner Carey and a second from Commissioner Peterson. Any comment? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, it passes unanimously. And next we have approval of the minutes. First is the review and possible approval of the minutes of the December 3rd, 2019 Planning Commission study session.
I'd like to make a motion.
Go ahead.
I move to approve the minutes from the December 3rd Planning Commission study session.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
We have a first from Commissioner Blanco and a second from Commissioner Peterson. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, pass unanimously. Next, we have review and possible approval of the minutes of the December 5th, 2019 Planning Commission meeting. Do we have a
Vice
motion?
Chair, I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a first from Commissioner Peterson and a second from Commissioner Blanco. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
All right, passes unanimously. Next, we have informational items.
Madam Chair,
Do you
I
have-
don't have any informational items for the planning commission at this time.
Okay, thank you, Armando. Okay, so we will go ahead and move to the public hearing items. First up is PCN 19-0019, that's not right. PCN 19-0036, consideration of and possible action on a request to amend a final plan development handbook, Kylie Ranch North Phase 2.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Planning Commissioners. I'm Jonathan Cummins, planner. PCN 19-36 is a request to amend the Plan Development Handbook for Kylie Ranch North Phase 2. The site for Phase 2 is outlined in red on the map. The tentative handbook for the greater Kylie Ranch North development was approved in 2004 for a development of just over 830 acres. It was intended that the larger Kylie Ranch North development would be approved in phases over time, and as such, those individual phases would have their own land use categories, permitted uses, development standards, and so on. So the tentative handbook was amended recently in November of 2019. It now includes 874 acres with some realignments of phases, including the one that's before you tonight. The applicant and staff agree that the proposed realignment of phases and the land use categories and the permitted uses throughout the larger Kylie Ranch North development better reflect the intended comprehensive planned land uses. So a little bit of background on this particular item. The Kylie Ranch North Phase 2 handbook was originally adopted in 2006. It was amended in 2014, and as of now includes 12.01 acres of mixed use and open space. As you can see on the second slide, the proposed new Phase 2 will add 9.3 acres to the existing 12.01. for a new total of 21.31 acres to include 0.84 acres of open space. So the parcels outlined in bright green on the top of the parcel or the top of the property are going to be added to what was existing outlined in blue. So the red outline is the new Phase 2 of Kylie Ranch North. So in addition to realigning and adding some land to Phase 2, the main changes are the permitted uses allowed for in Phase 2. So these are categorized somewhat broadly, but they're actually relatively limited in what was allowed originally in Phase 2. The office building that currently exists there is the only structure on the site. Allowed for it originally was attached or detached single-family housing in addition to a multifamily and a limited gaming, which was anticipated and never came to fruition. So I'm going to show sort of a strikeout with added in blue the new uses that will be allowed according to the proposed amendments. So stricken out in red are detached single-family residences, so no longer will those be permitted in Phase 2 in order to achieve the mixed-use character that was anticipated in the tentative handbook. And so there's a pretty exhaustive list of permitted uses now in Phase 2, and I've categorized those and broken them down into these, what I've outlined in blue: medical office, lodging, personal services, et cetera. There's various restaurant, retail, and other office uses that are going to be permitted in this phase, which staff and the applicant agree will contribute to the mixed-use character of Phase 2. So the following findings are required in order to amend a plan development handbook, and I'll apologize ahead of time. I've tried to group a couple of them together, but it gets a little bit repetitive as far as what we have to find in a plan development handbook amendment. Findings A and B are consistency with the comprehensive plan, as well as consistency with surrounding land uses. The proposed changes will bring Phase 2 into conformance with the tentative handbook. That's our main point that we're going to be making throughout various findings tonight. Specifically, in addition to coming into conformance with the tentative handbook, we'll be coming into conformance with the comprehensive plan by meeting goals MG1 and MG2. Those are to support economic vitality with a non-residential land use base and to foster diversity in the land use mix. The added commercial uses will create a mixed-use environment in addition to removing the single-family housing, which will require multifamily housing as well as attached single-family like townhouses and condominiums, et cetera. Finding C requires that an amendment to a plan development handbook be fiscally positive to the city for 20 years. Because of the amendment to the tentative handbook, which was conducted or approved last year, fiscal impact analysis was conducted for the changes in land uses at that time, and as such, we did not require one for this particular realignment of Phase 2. Findings D and E are to further the interest of residents, to preserve the plan, and not to impair the reasonable reliance of residents on the plan as approved. So the residents of Kylie Ranch North will benefit from the added services and commercial destinations that will be available on the Phase 2 site. And as such, we're supporting residents' original reliance on the handbook, those who are currently residing in Kylie Ranch North, as well as in greater North Sparks. Finding F requires that proposed changes will not adversely affect the public interest. Staff and the applicant agreed that adding these commercial and other uses to Phase 2 would have a positive effect, adding a greater number of services available to the residents of Kylie Ranch North more broadly. Finding G requires consistency with the development and preservation of the entire plan development. The proposed changes are essentially bringing the Phase 2 site into conformance with the larger Kylie Ranch North tentative handbook. As I said, it's a little bit repetitive, but this is sort of the overall goal of doing this tonight. Finding H requires that the changes not affect the enjoyment of land abutting or across a street from the development. This is the question that came up on our study session on Tuesday, so I wanted to elaborate a little bit that we believe that the proposed uses, the retail, restaurant, office, et cetera, are going to add not only services and destinations for residents, but also add employment opportunities to the residents of the single family that surrounds the site, for instance. So I hope that addresses what we were sort of looking to get at on Tuesday. Finding I requires that amendments not grant or confer a private benefit upon any person. The changes are proposed to bring Phase 2 into conformance with the handbook, bring added services to all of North Sparks, therefore no individual person would be intended to benefit from these changes more than any other. And finding J requires public notice be given and public hearing held. We did mail 89 notices to residents and property owners within 750 feet of the site on January 1st, and tonight's meeting serves as the public hearing. And I will be glad to take your questions.
Thank you. Do the commissioners have any questions for staff?
I do.
Commissioner Blake?
Have we received any response from the public notices at all?
I received 2 emails from members of the public asking to clarify the list of uses that we provided earlier tonight. So that information was given to those people who asked for it, and beyond that, there was no reply.
Any other questions? Commissioner Carey?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Jonathan, I wanted to follow up on my question I had in the study session about the potential impact that you talked about in finding age. Just wondered if you were able to dig up some more info on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I tried to sort of summarize what the sort of benefits would be potentially by adding the specific uses, the commercial, including retail, restaurant, office uses that are not only going to provide new services for the residents who live to the east and to the south, or who will live to the east and to the south of the property on the IDR, intermediate density residential sites. So we've concluded by, in conferring with the applicant that those uses would be a benefit to those potential surrounding properties, which would be single family to a great extent. So does that answer your question?
It sure does. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any other further questions? Thank you. Would the applicant like to come up and provide any additional information?
Thank you. Good evening. Derek Wilson with Rubicon Design Group. I don't think I need to add very much. Staff has done a great job, and I think Kylie Ranch in general has been pretty heavily reviewed. But I would just like to point out that the new uses that were mentioned are not necessarily specific to this Phase 2. We're not bringing new uses to Kylie Ranch in general. It's a follow-on from the tentative approval, which expanded this area to a mixed-use land use designation. And that MU category does introduce those new uses as allowable within Phase 2, but we're not, in general, revamping Kylie Ranch as a whole. We're just expanding that allowed use table to this particular section of the project. So I can elaborate on that as needed, but that's all I wanted to clarify. Thank you.
Thank you. Do the commissioners have any questions for the applicant? Or any other further questions? Commissioner Carey?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Okay. Well, this is a public hearing item, so with that, I'd like to open up the public comment. Do we have any public comment on this item? Anybody else from the audience wish to address this item? Hearing none, then I will close the public hearing and bring back to the commission.
I'd like to make a motion.
Go ahead, Commissioner Blanco.
I move to forward a recommendation of approval to the City Council of PCN 19-0036, an amendment to the final handbook for Phase 2 of the Kylie Ranch North Plan development. As the proposed amendment is in substantial compliance with the tentative Kylie Ranch North Plan development handbook, adopting findings A through J, and the facts supporting these findings as set forth in the staff report.
Thank you. We have a second? Second. We have a motion by Commissioner Blanco and a second by Commissioner Pritzos. Are we ready for a vote? Okay. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? All right, passes unanimously. Thank you. Name Pritzos. That's all right. I'll get it right. Next, we have, the next item is CA-2-19, consideration of and possible action on amendments to Title 20 of the Sparks Municipal Code to revise definitions and the map, permitted uses, and sign standards for the mixed-use district zoning.
Thank you, Commissioner Reed. Chairwoman Reed tonight. Jim Rundle, Planning Manager, here to present on the item as Commissioner Reed just outlined. Tonight, the Planning Commission will, on this item, will act in an advisory capacity as they consider revisions to some definitions, some mapping, some permitted uses, and also some sign standard within the mixed-use district, the MUD. In 2011, the city of Sparks initiated a process of amending the Title 20, or the zoning ordinance. And this is the zoning ordinance that ultimately you see today. Ensuring that the document stays current, occasional amendments are required. And at the October and November city council meetings, the city council directed staff to consider proposing amendments to the Planning Commission regarding auto-oriented uses in the mixed-use district, internet sales in the mixed-use district, and consider looking at additional locations for tattoo parlors. The heart of the zoning ordinance is its master plan or permitted use table, as was just talked about, the permitted use table for Kiley Ranch. With the original of creation of what used to be called the Transit-Oriented Development, or the TOD district, and is now the MUD district, most of the auto-oriented uses were removed in that original plan. Some of the current businesses in the city of Sparks that you see along Prater Way, along our mixed-use arterial, predated the approval of that original TOD plan. That city master plan that created the TOD came out of the regional plan in 2002, so it has been in place for quite some time. In that 2002 regional plan, it identified the need for doing higher density and intensity in the mixed-use corridors of the city of Sparks and Reno, which this Planning Commission has seen come to fruition. But the demand for auto-oriented uses has endured, and there is still demand for those. And so this amendment process proposes to permit auto repair and car washes within the mixed-use commercial area of the mixed-use district, subject to a conditional use permit. I'd like to bring up Exhibit A on the screens above. Exhibit A within your packet reflects some, I'm going to call them the pink areas on this map, also identified as the mixed-use commercial areas within the mixed-use district. And staff is proposing that auto repair light would be permitted in that mixed-use commercial area, as well as car washes. Light auto repair would permit things like filter changes or fluid changes, more specifically oil changes, a smog test, purchase of tire and installation of tires. And what came up in the study session from Commissioner Carey on Tuesday, would it permit a brake job? And it would permit brake jobs in light auto repair. It would not permit heavy auto repairs, such as what might happen in a car accident, where you're getting welders out and torches and bending frames and replacing a metal or such on the car. That would still be restricted to the industrial area or the industrial zone property, which tends to be south of Interstate 80 in the city of Sparks. And there's a little bit of it to the east of Sparks Boulevard, south of Prater Way, but primarily south of Interstate 80. Staff is also proposing with this amendment to permit auto detail as a specific permitted use that would be permitted in the mixed-use commercial area, the pink areas up on this map. Auto detail, what staff has identified, is a use that is typically done by hand. It is not a car wash that has automated and a lot more intense noise type of use. It is done by hand. It may be polishing. It may be also done inside of a building, and it's typically limited to a car or two. It is not as intense as numerous cars running through the facility at one time. It also tends to be along the lines of more typical business hours, 8 to 5, 8 to 6, not necessarily a 24-hour operation that a car wash could generate. I'd like to now move on to, I believe it is Exhibit D in your packet. And this is the first page that begins to talk about the mixed-use district in the Title 20 and the zoning ordinance. What staff is proposing to do with this amendment is strike the current map that is illustrated in this area and replace it with what you just saw in Exhibit A. We believe that this is appropriate because it identifies the planned developments in this in the city of Sparks's mixed-use district area. The mixed-use district is a master planned area, so it also includes some areas that are zoned PD, but not necessarily zoned MUD. If you were to use this map, someone in the public, they may very well look up and look at the legends, and identify that to be mixed-use commercial. Then they may very well go to the use table and identify what uses are permitted in the mixed-use commercial. Utilizing the old map that we're requesting to strike, you may have the wrong interpretation of what would be permitted at the legends. We believe that the new map, identifying that as a PD, as it is, the perimeter is identified with blue and it identifies it as the legends, would help to direct them to the plan development where they would be able to look up the appropriate permitted use standards. We just believe this provides clarity. We can take that exhibit down for now, thank you. As discussed earlier in my presentation, the City Council directed staff to identify or consider additional locations to permit tattoo establishments or tattoo parlors in the city of Sparks. Staff is proposing to the Planning Commission that the most appropriate mechanism to do this is by adding the use into the definition of personal services. I'd like to point to Exhibit B and pull that up on the overheads that's included in your packet. This is a map of the entire city of Sparks, and the areas identified in green are where tattoo parlors are currently permitted in the city of Sparks. What staff is proposing to do, again, is to include in the definition of personal services tattoo parlors, which would permit them in the green areas and the blue areas on this map. Personal services, as currently defined in the Title 20, include beauty shops, laundry facilities, dry cleaners, nail salons, pet groomers, massage establishments. And we believe that this is a similar use to what is called out in those definitions. In hopes of obtaining additional information from those conducting the use currently in the city of Sparks, Sparks used the business license information to send out a notice to those conducting tattoo parlors in Sparks after we coordinated a neighborhood meeting. Unfortunately, nobody attended the neighborhood meeting, so we did not necessarily gain anything from that meeting. But we did still utilize our partners in other government agencies in the region, and in discussion with the Washoe County District Health Department, we identified the District Health Department does not differentiate between permanent makeup and tattoo parlors. We would identify permanent makeup with a beauty salon in the city of Sparks. District Health identifies tattoos and permanent makeup as an invasive body decoration, so they are under the same classification. Since this is how District Health considered it, and through the other analysis that we've done, staff again is proposing to include tattoo parlors in the definition of personal services. We can take that down, thank you. Now, moving on, staff is also proposing with this amendment process to bifurcate fulfillment center from wholesale distribution and warehousing, as it's currently included in that definition. Can we pull up Exhibit A, Casey? Thank you. This is Exhibit A in your staff report, and we are proposing to permit fulfillment center in, again, the pink areas on the map up here, also known as the mixed-use district, the mixed-use commercial area of the mixed-use district. Oh, it is? Oh,
Yeah, it looks
interesting.
purple to me too.
Okay, it's pink on the ones I can see, and it's pink in your actual paper exhibits, but I'll use the term purple from moving forward. And Commissioner,
Pink on Facebook.
utilizing the Facebook standard, it's pink. Thank you, Armando. Okay, so purple. We're proposing to permit fulfillment center in the purple or pink areas or the mixed-use commercial designation on the Exhibit A. What we've done here is also amended the definition of warehousing and fulfillment center. We've identified that fulfillment center, and I'm going to read this, A fulfillment center provides goods to be sold and shipped to a retail customer, whereas warehousing is utilized for goods being transferred to or sold by another entity. And those do tend to generate different traffic demands and different types of traffic to the uses. We do believe it is appropriate to bifurcate those definitions. We've also added respectively parking standards for these uses. Lastly, the amendment that I want to bring to the Planning Commission's attention is an amendment to the sign standard within the mixed-use district. And what this amendment proposes to do is reinstate a tool that parcels formerly had, and that tool is identified as the gateway sign tool. In 2003, the city of Sparks welcomed the In-N-Out Burger into the city of Sparks at the corner of Pyramid and Victorian, or B Street, formerly B Street. In response to that, the applicant's request at that time, the city of Sparks City Council adopted what was called the Gateway Sign Ordinance. The Gateway Sign Ordinance allowed for taller signs to be constructed on certain parcels on gateway streets. The gateway streets primarily are those that have the interchanges, Sparks Boulevard, McCarran, Pyramid, and down to Kitsky. That amendment allowed for someone to build a sign taller than what was typically permitted so that it could be oriented toward I-80 and essentially go a little bit higher since the freeway is elevated in those areas. And ultimately, you did see the construction of the In-N-Out Burger. Its sign, it is still there, and it is a little bit taller than what would otherwise be permitted at that site. When the mixed-use district, or TOD, zoning standards came into place, the city of Sparks approved and rezoned a significant portion of the city of Sparks into what you see on this map, primarily zoned TOD, and then it evolved into the MUD. What happened with that rezoning was that certain parcels that had the ability to utilize that gateway tool had that removed because it required the parcels to be zoned tourist commercial. So what we are proposing is that those parcels that are an acre and are within that gateway, the gateway streets and within those primary intersections would potentially be able to have that tool again. Doesn't mean that they will utilize it, but they would be able to have it again. In my presentation, I've talked about some potential map amendments for the Planning Commission to consider, some potential permitted use, additional permitted uses to be reinstated back into the MUD, and also consideration to amend a definition of personal services to permit tattoo parlors in additional locations in the city of Sparks based on city council direction. And that concludes my presentation, and I'm available for any questions.
Thank you, Jim. Does the commission have any questions? Commissioner Peterson.
Will you explain the gateway signs to me again, please? I understand you say it was on Prater and Sparks Boulevard would be subject to that?
If I said Prater, that's not necessary, that is not
I
the
might have
street I
missed one,
intended.
that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, it is essentially within the zoning ordinance, within our sign ordinance, we have GPS markings. Those GPS, almost like a latitude and longitude, if you're within this distance, within this circumference of the intersection of, say, Pyramid Way and I-80, you can have a taller sign. It would not extend all the way to Prater. Prater's too far north in that respect, but it would be like potentially Sparks Boulevard and Interstate 80, Vista and Interstate 80, McCarran and Interstate 80, Pyramid and Interstate 80. You work your way down into those specific interchanges with those roads and certain parcels that had proximity to the interstate.
With view of the freeway, correct?
I'm sorry, Commissioner
So
Peterson.
it has to be as in view of the freeway?
Yes.
No, then on a follow-up on that, Jim, is that when those establishments that are, some of them are almost elevated with the freeway, they can't have that, right? Like if you get up on Vista, some of those are almost directly in line with the freeway anyhow.
Can you give me an example which parcel you're referring to?
Pardon me?
Which parcel you're referring to?
On the gateway signs.
Yes.
They're extended a little higher than what we usually, so, but I'm talking about if you're on Vista,
Yes.
right before the freeway, some of those new elements going in there, the things are level with the freeway. They
Okay,
would- they
or
would
even
not-
higher than the freeway?
Or even
Okay.
higher.
So the way it works is you do have to be 1 acre in size. And some of those parcels you're referring to are not 1 acre in size. You would have to have a tourist commercial zoning. And I believe that Chevron and McDonald's are zone C2.
Right.
And at that location, the Wendy's does not carry tourist commercial, but
Then you got a new development across the street from that.
and that is a planned development.
Oh.
So that wouldn't be affected either. So it's parcels that either have the mixed-use district designation, the tourist commercial designation, are 1 acre, over 1 acre in size, are within the GPS coordinates for the gateway. So there are very specific standards to where this can occur.
And they will be spelled out in the condition, correct?
There's no conditions because this is a code amendment, so this would
Code
be.
amendment.
This would be articulated, this is articulated in the exhibits that you have and would be incorporated into law for the city of Sparks regarding signage. Now, if you exceed the height, your parcel is higher than the freeway, then you would be limited to 35 feet.
Yeah, right.
If you did comply, if you did meet all those standards. But it's more so for where the Interstate 80 is elevated above the parcel. So if the interstate's here and you're down here, you could build a sign that they could see from the interstate.
Thank you, sir.
Any other commissioners? Yes, Commissioner Reed says.
So what are tattoo parlors classified as now, if not personal service?
Tattoo parlors are classified as tattoo parlors.
Oh, they're their own thing?
Yes.
Okay.
And that, if in your exhibit, you'll see in the definitions and in the permitted use table, staff has proposed to strike the use of tattoo parlors because it's being incorporated into another use. We're proposing anyway.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense, thank you.
Commissioner Blako.
I have a quick question. I might be touching on what Scott was getting at with the question about brake jobs. Would surfacing rotors be considered light repair? Because that is something that can be quite noisy.
Yes,
And I
that
don't know
would be
if that'd be-
considered a part of a
Okay.
brakes, yes.
Okay.
Commissioner Carey, do you have any questions?
Yeah, thank you. I had one question concerning the proposed change with allowing additional car washes within the NUD, subject to a conditional use permit. I was curious, there's quite a few existing car washes that are within our NUD district right now. I was curious, what's the land use justification for allowing more car washes within the mixed use district?
Thank you, and through the chair, Commissioner Reed, to respond. I tried to touch on that in the earlier components of the presentation where we identified that staff and the Planning Commission and City Council at one time took all of those oriented uses. One, for example, was drive-through restaurants. That was removed as a permitted use in the TOD and mixed use district. But what we've found is the reduction in the demand for the auto-oriented uses, including car washes, has not been reduced, even though the population and the higher densities and intensities are starting to come to fruition. And so we have had direction from City Council to propose reinstating these uses into the mixed-use district.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Jim. With that, this is a public hearing item, so I'd like to open it up for public comment, if there is any. Would anybody from the audience like to come up and speak on this item? Okay, with that, we will close the public hearing and bring back to the commission. Any further discussion, a motion?
Madam Vice Chairman, I'd like to make a motion, please.
Commissioner Peterson, go ahead.
I move to forward a recommendation of approval to the City Council of the amendment to Title 20 of the Sparks Municipal Code to revise the definitions and the map, permitted use, and sign standards for the MUD mixed-use districts, zoning districts associated with CA-2-19.
Thank you. We have a second?
I'll second that.
Second by, first by Commissioner Peterson, second by Commissioner Blanco. Any further discussion? Okay, we're ready
Couple
to,
comments.
okay, go ahead.
Thank you. Couple comments for the record. Yeah, I like these proposed changes to the code. I think that they will allow our code to adapt to how the city's growing. I have some concerns about allowing auto-oriented uses within the mixed-use district from a land use perspective, but I certainly understand the council's direction and their, the need to continue them for now. I like how the auto uses, with auto light repair and car washes will be allowed subject to a conditional use permit. I think that's good to allow for additional review and public input. I really think this is a comment in general. I really think we need to take a look at the mixed-use district as a whole, considering how the RTC has been cutting transit within the district and within the city as a whole. I think there's some areas of the MED district that don't really make much sense given the transportation reality moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other further discussion? With that, we have a motion on the floor. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, passes unanimously. Thank you. Next, we will move to our general business items. First up is PCN 19-0019. Consideration of and possible action on a tentative map request for 102 lot single-family subdivision on a site located at 7900 Pyramid Way in Sparks.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, members of the Planning Commission. I'm Ian Crittenden, the Acting Development Services Manager. So this is a tentative map request for a 182 lot single-family subdivision. The lot is located, as you can see here on the map, this is Pyramid Way, this is Dolores Drive, David James, and then Robert Banks is just peeking in at the top of the map here. And if you've been out to the Antelope Family Farm, you kind of get the reference of it. It's located here as well. The proposed map will occupy the southern 62.49 acres of the greater 110 acre site, 110.89 acre site. The greater site is outlined here in red. It's actually made up of two parcels. And the proposed tentative map is just the area outlined in blue, that is 62.49 acres. The handbook designation for this site is LMDR, which stands for Low Medium Density Residential, which allows a maximum density of 8 units per acre, or has a target density, I should say, of 8 units per acre, as we'll talk about a little bit later on. The site has a comprehensive plan land use designation of IDR, or Intermediate Density Residential, which permits between 6 and 10 units per acre. As proposed, the map would permit lots between 6,500 and 18,479 square feet. We can see that on this map here. After the study session, I was able to find a much better map that kind of details how these lots lay out on that site. The proposed density minus the open space would be about 3.8 units per acre. This is in conformance with the handbook, which only sets an upper limit to the number of units that can be built on the site, but is not in compliance with the minimum standard carried in the comprehensive plan land use density, which does have a minimum of 6 units per acre. However, in situations like this where we do have conflict between the zoning, which is what the handbook is for this site, and the comprehensive plan, the zoning is the operative regulations. In connection to that as well, however, the applicant also owns a multifamily residential parcel that is to the north of this site. If we go back out here, it occupies kind of this area here that is zoned or designated in the handbook as MDR, which is medium density residential, which has a maximum density of 24 units per acre. And so the applicant has indicated to the city and written us a letter indicating their intent to transfer density that is not used on these single-family lots into their multifamily project. That is that density transfer is allowed per the handbook, and so they just help to clarify that that is their intent. The applicant also submitted a fiscal impact analysis that updated when the handbook was amended in 2018. There was a fiscal impact analysis that was done to kind of show how this development would, what kind of impact it would have fiscally on the city. And they did an update in regards to that for this site. And while the overall surplus that this site would generate did drop, it still shows a positive impact, a fiscal surplus of over $400,000 over a 20-year period for the site, even at the lower density. The site will be accessed from Pyramid Way via a couple of different streets. The first of which is Tierra del Sol Parkway comes in here. This is the Tierra del Sol planned development. Tierra del Sol Parkway will be extended. This is kind of this intersection area here. It'll come up. This is Tierra del Sol. This is Stonebrook Parkway, and there's actually another street just to the north of here. I apologize for flipping back and forth between these so much, but this is the David James street alignment. The Summer Wild Drive is another street that will be brought in that will attach from here kind of down to this area here where the northern attachment to the planned development or the planned subdivision will go. And that will replace the existing road that kind of takes you into the Annual Family Farm. It'll replace that and be the new route into this area of the city and then ultimately into the county. The applicant submitted a traffic impact analysis that looked at the total number of trips that are going to be generated by the whole of the western portion of the Stonebrook planned development. Those numbers were very high, and we talked with them and worked with them and got an indication of what the actual impact from this specific development would be. And while a connection of Stonebrook Parkway to Pyramid Way at the Dolores intersection will ultimately be required, the development of this site in particular will not specifically require that. However, as part of their traffic analysis for this site, the applicant did do what they call a gap analysis to look at the number of U-turns that were available at the Robert Banks intersection, again, here just at the top of the map, that how much room or availability for additional U-turns exists there. Through that analysis, they were able to show that 132 or 131 total U-turns could be handled at that intersection. And so a condition of approval that we have suggested for this development is that with any final maps that are pulled off of this tentative map, that they submit a detailed analysis showing what the current number of U-turns is available there or happening there, plus whatever would be generated by the final map that they're submitting. And if it exceeds 131, then that would require that signal light and intersection improvement plans be submitted with that final map for installation. While we can't extend that to any other development on this site, it is the intent of staff to attach it to any other administrative reviews or other development that comes in along this side. That will be a standard that will continue to move forward with additional projects to show that when we hit that standard, that we make sure that light be installed and help alleviate that stress that will come as part of the traffic impacts. There are 12 findings of fact, or 12 findings that are required to be considered when reviewing tentative maps. I'm going to go through these. I've tried to condense them in this one, and we'll see how that goes. But finding one looks for conformance to the comprehensive plan. This development and the zoning for the site, this development does this development does support comp plan goals H2 by providing housing and being physically positive over a 20-year period. The development also has sidewalks throughout the site, which supports policy C4, and city services can be provided at acceptable levels as sewer and other infrastructure is nearby and convenient to be extended to the site, which supports policy C9. Findings T2 and T8 require that impacts to streets and street networks be considered. As I mentioned, significant roadway construction and improvements are required along this west side of Stonebrook. The 1,780 daily trips that this specific tentative map would generate will not trigger the construction of all of them. However, the transportation backbone, which is this extension of Tierra del Sol Parkway up through this site and actually all the way up to La Posada Drive and some other additional street improvements, that backbone infrastructure plans have actually already been submitted to the city and are being reviewed by the city engineer as the applicant is looking to develop this site, and they would be able to market the commercial areas to the north as well more actively if those improvements are approved. Findings T3, T4, T5, T9, and T10 all require that other agencies with administrative oversight for utilities, health, and safety laws have an opportunity to review this project. We did receive a letter was distributed to the Planning Commission from the Washoe County Air Quality Department Management District that indicates that they have air quality monitoring equipment in the area, and that the applicant has been asked that to cooperate as they determine whether or not this site will continue to meet EPA standards with the development of their site. The project sewer generation for this development is estimated at 63,700 gallons per day. The city sewer model does show adequate capacity to move this amount of sewer. The project's water usage for this development is estimated at 86.84 acre feet per year. Water rights sufficient to meet this need will need to be submitted or documented and shown prior to a final map being approved. Finding T-City looks at availability and accessibility of other public services such as school, police, fire, and transportation. The development will be served by the City of Sparks Police Department. The site is not located where the 4-minute travel time standard for Sparks Fire can be met. However, this area is served by an automatic aid agreement with the Truckee Meadows Fire Protection District. The development also increases attendance at Washoe County schools. A letter from the school district indicates that they anticipate that this development will add 37 new students to Hall Elementary, 16 to Shaw Middle, and 17 to Spanish Springs High School. Of these schools, only Spanish Springs High School is at or exceeding capacity, and it is anticipated that the Spanish Springs High School will receive some relief when the new Hug High School is built at the Wild Creek location. Finding T8 looks at slopes and floodplain. This site is not in the floodplain and does not have any slopes that would trigger the requirements for the slope and hillside analysis to be performed, or the additional slopes and hillsides and ridges requirements to be in place. Finding T11 looks for other identified impacts. In the case of this project, we identified architecture and landscaping as other identified impacts for this development. The Plan Development Handbook has lots of details for architecture standards as well as landscaping standards, and any final map that's submitted will have to submit plans that show that they meet those standards. That is our standard practice. Finding T12 requires proper notice and this item being heard at a meeting. The notice is accomplished by the posting of the agenda and this meeting qualifies as part of the meeting requirements for a tentative map. That is the end of my presentation. The applicant is here, and I am available for any questions that you might have.
And does any of the commissioners have questions? Commissioner Carey, do you have any questions?
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Two questions for staff. Ian, and I'm sorry if I missed it here on the phone. The response to the county's concern about the air quality station, how is that going to be addressed again? Is that a new condition of approval?
As staff read that letter, there's not really any condition of approval to pull out of that letter. That letter really is just stating that, hey, we are the Washoe County Air Quality Department. We have a monitoring station. We are trying to determine whether or not this development will cause that station to no longer meet EPA standards. We're asking the developer to work with us as we try to determine whether or not it does. There's not really, as far as staff could see, a condition of approval to pull from that, as that agency already has the ability to work with the developer on their own. They don't need our condition to tell them they can do that.
Oh, okay, I appreciate that explanation. Yeah, that's a pretty important air quality station. I think it's the only one in Spanish Springs. So I appreciate that explanation. My second question is why can't the city require or condition the density transfer that the applicant has proposed?
So the reason that the staff or the city can't propose or condition that density transfer is because conditions of approval for tentative maps are accomplished or have to be shown to be done at the time that a final map is approved. And since they would require that density transfer to happen prior to a tentative map or outside of the requirements for a tentative map, the tentative map could be filed and there's no way for us to tie that to outside property. It can only be addressed on the property that is being tentative mapped and then accomplished through the final map.
Oh, okay, that makes sense because the development to the north would be built after that final map would be issued.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even in the case of it being built beforehand, potentially, we can't condition property that's not inside the tentative map on the tentative map, if that makes sense. The tentative map can only condition property inside of its boundary, not property outside of it.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Any other questions for staff? Thank you, Ian. Can the applicant come up?
Good evening, Stacy Huggins representing the applicant.
Thank you. And if you have anything to add, and if you could also address the letter from the Washoe County Health District, some of the...
Sure. I don't have anything to add to Ian's presentation. I think he covered the project and the request very thoroughly, so I don't think we need to add anything. As far as the letter from Air Quality, we've reviewed it and we understand where their position is, and we're happy to work with them and the City of Sparks.
Thank you. Do any of the commissioners have questions for the applicant? Commissioner Carey?
Thank you. Question for Stacy. What is the timing on the multifamily development to the north that you intend to transfer units?
Well, Commissioner Carey, if you'll give me just a second, because the developer actually submitted a letter, and so I don't want to speak out of line. I'm not sure that they have a specific time, but I would anticipate it to come in the next year for an administrative review.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Thank you. So I'll bring it back to the commission. Any further discussion or motion or?
Or go ahead and make a motion.
Thank you, Commissioner Blake.
I move to forward to City Council a recommendation of approval of the tentative map associated with PCN 19-0019 for a 182 lot single-family subdivision on a site 62.49 acres in size located in the Stonebrook Plan Development, adopting findings T1 through T12 and the facts supporting these findings as set forth in the staff report and subject to the conditions of approval 1 through 17.
Thank you. So we have a first by Commissioner Blako and a second by Commissioner Peterson. Any further discussion? Okay, let's take a,
Couple comments
go ahead.
for the record. Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Yeah, I'm having a really hard time with making finding T1. I can't see how the proposed tentative map is conformance with the master plan. Just it fails to meet the density that was envisioned in the handbook and that's outlined in our comprehensive plan. I disagree with the interpretation on NRS 278-349-3E. I don't think that was the intent of the law in giving precedence to zoning that doesn't require any density and just kind of throwing that out the door or out the window, you know, for the sake of our comprehensive plan. I can certainly appreciate the tough position that staff's in with this tentative map, and I certainly appreciate the applicant offering the intended density transfer. I think we've gotten as much as we possibly can, but I just can't see finding one. And I don't think without a requirement that density transfer actually happen or anything concrete, I don't see how we can use justification of an intended transfer to support making finding T1 and that it's in compliance with the comprehensive plan. I don't have any reason to suspect at this time that the applicant won't go through with the density transfer, but I'm really concerned about the fiscal impact if that doesn't happen in the future and we're building a tentative map that's well below the density, and I just can't make finding T1, unfortunately. And I will not be supporting the motion.
Thank you, Commissioner Carey. Any other discussion? Okay, we have a motion and a second. Call for a vote. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Okay, passes with 1 nay. Thank you. Next, we have item PCN 19-0038, consideration of and possible action on a tentative map request for a 454-lot single-family subdivision located east of Golden Eagle Regional Park and south of Vista. Oh, you're back.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Members of the Planning Commission, Ian Crittenden, Acting Development Services Manager. This is a request for a 454-lot single-family residential subdivision or tentative map. As you can see on the map, this is located directly east of Golden Eagle Regional Park and slightly southwest of Vista Boulevard. The city entered into a development agreement with in 2018 for the development of Wingfield Commons. On January 13th, the City Council amended that agreement to change the CLOMAR process, the conditional letter of map revision process. We'll get into that a little more when we're talking about floodplain. That amendment brought the CLOMAR process outlined in the development agreement into closer conformance with the standard practice for the City of Sparks. The site is zoned SF6, which typically has a minimum lot size of 6,000 square feet. However, the applicant is proposing to use the small lot standard permitted in our code, which allows smaller lots so long as the density of 7.3 units per acre is not exceeded. The proposed map meets the small lot standards and has a density of 6.98 dwelling units per acre. Fiscal impact analysis was submitted with the development agreement and showed an overall positive fiscal impact to the city associated with this development. The applicant submitted an update to that fiscal analysis with this request. The applicant verified the conclusions of the original analysis and indicated that over a 20-year period, this development will generate a surplus of over $1.6 million to the general fund and a surplus of over $1.5 million to the road fund. The site is accessed from Vista Boulevard via two streets that are within the Golden Eagle Regional Park. Golden Eagle Regional Park is located on BLM property and is operated through an RP&P lease with the BLM. As such, all roads within this development will be private as they do not connect to the city's road infrastructure, or road network. The applicant will be required to construct and maintain their access road, which will come in off of Vista Boulevard onto Home Run and then down to Touchdown and then cross this open space of the park and then onto an existing road here on the west side of the kind of the red area. They will also be required to construct and maintain a fire access road, or a FAAR, which is a fire apparatus access road, onto the site. If we switch over here, I apologize for this being turned. I'm actually going to rotate it twice apparently, since I did it the wrong way the first time. This is the same orientation as the last map you're looking at. This is Vista Boulevard. So you can see here where the site access will come in, turn, and come along here and down into the site, or down this far and then onto the site. And then the fire apparatus access road comes in here just east or kind of northeast of the fire station, come in through the backside and come to the backside to the east side of the property for fire access purposes. So in addition to needing to construct and maintain their access roads, there's also significant improvements that will need to be done to Touchdown Drive, Home Run Drive, and the intersection of, Home Run Drive, Vista Boulevard, and this is Scorpius Drive that goes on to the north. That intersection will have some improvements that are needed as well. Those are all laid out very specifically in the development agreement, and the triggers for the start and the finish of those processes for those improvements are tied to things outside of this tentative map. Again, like we had in the last situation, we can only require with a tentative map things that can be accomplished through the final map. And because the development agreement has triggers that we could not put inside the tentative map, they aren't found as conditions on this tentative map because they're already conditioned through the development agreement. They have conditions such as the time we pull the building permit for a certain number of buildings, then these improvements have to be started or done. Those kind of requirements can't be put on tentative maps because you can't build those lots until after the final map's already been approved. I apologize, I'm just finding my place. So as I stated, as part of the development agreement process, a substantial traffic impact analysis was submitted, and there were many improvements and requirements that were attached to that and in the development agreement. As part of this submittal, the applicant did submit an addendum to that development agreement, which showed what the impacts of the additional 4 units that the development or the impact analysis that was submitted with the development agreement looked at 450 lots. Now with 454, we wanted them to just make that small update. It did show an additional 38 trips, average trips a day, with an additional 3 AM peak hour trips and an additional 4 PM peak hour trips. This is a minimal amount of trip generation, will not impact the improvements required in that traffic impact analysis and required by the development agreement. There are 12 findings required to be considered with a tentative map. The first T1 looks for conformance with the comp plan and the zoning for the site. The proposed tentative map complies with the density standards of the comprehensive plan and the zoning ordinance. The comp plan use designation for this site is IDR, which requires 6 to 10 units per acre. And the SF6 zoning on the site requires or has a maximum density of 7.3 units per acre. As proposed, this map would provide 6.9 units per acre. The design of the site complies with the design standards for SF6, zoning district by utilizing the small lot development standards. In addition, this map supports Comp Plan Goal H2 to promote strong and diverse housing market that supports economic growth and vitality while ensuring environmental and fiscal sustainability. It also supports Policy C4, which requires sidewalks for pedestrians on all street networks, and Policy CF1, which requires city services to be provided at acceptable levels. Finding T2 looks for conformance with the city's master plan for roads. All streets in this development, all internal streets will be private, and the traffic analysis and addendum for this project have detailed that the improvements necessary to accommodate the traffic generated with this development will happen as part of the requirements for the development, with the development agreement. Finding T3 requires that environmental health concerns be addressed. The application was distributed to agencies that administer environmental and health laws. The Washoe County Health District replied with 2 comments specific to this site. They had a lot of comments that are generally applicable to all new development and all tentative maps. But specific to this site, they had two comments. One was that the existing septic, there's a house here on the far south end of the site. There's an existing septic tank that there will have to be abandoned, and there's also a domestic well that will have to be abandoned. Compliance with these requirements is required by condition 4 of the proposed conditions of approval. Finding T4 requires that adequate water be provided. The applicant has estimated that 141.37 acre feet per year will be needed. Condition 5 requires that the applicant secure water rights to serve the development prior to final maps. Finding T5 looks at the availability and accessibility of other utilities, namely sewer and storm sewer. The applicant has estimated the average daily sewer flows for this development at 105,000 gallons. The sewer model shows sufficient capacity for this development. The applicant will have to submit with final maps, detailed drawings, and such that will show how that's going to be accomplished and will need to be approved by the city engineer. Finding T6 considers the availability of other public services. Impacts that the city was able to identify were those to schools, police, transportation, fire, and emergency medical response and utilities. Police and fire protection will be provided by the city of Sparks. This site is within the 4-minute travel time, as the fire station's right there. This one's got it pretty good as far as making the travel time. As mentioned previously, street and intersection improvements will be required with the development of this site. All other utilities necessary to the site will be extended underground to the site. Development of this development will have an impact on Washoe County schools, public schools. In a letter received from the Washoe County School District, it is estimated that this development will add 111 new students to Van Gorder Elementary, 40 to Sky Ranch Middle School, and 43 to Spanish Springs High School. Van Gorder Elementary is over capacity, as is Spanish Springs High School. I don't know how to say this, I might get it wrong. Bohatch, is that right? Bohatch Elementary, that's the new elementary school being built in Kylie Ranch. And the new Hug High School, which is on Wild Creek, are expected to provide relief to both of those schools. Finding T7 looks at the effects on streets. As I discussed previously, this development will require street and intersection improvements. Those improvements and the city streets will be able to, with those improvements, the city streets will be able to operate at acceptable levels of service with the additional traffic. Finding T8 looks at floodplain and slopes. The site is very flat and does not trigger any of the slopes or ridges requirements. However, the site does have an area that is in the floodplain. It's this area here outlined in yellow. It's again is turned. So that's the orientation. It actually sits with with the top being to the north. This area here is in the floodplain. That is what spurred a lot of the Clomar discussion that brought about the development agreement amendment. The applicant has submitted a Clomar to FEMA for their review, and so we are proposing condition, I don't have it written down here, a condition that will require that a final that approved Clomar be presented with a tentative map, or with any final map for the site. Finding T9 requires that entities with review authority be notified and have opportunity to comment. The Washoe County School District was the only agency that replied. They're not the only agency, them and Washoe County Health District with their comments about the septic and well also replied, and they were addressed earlier when I was covering finding T3. Finding T10 requires that fire protection concerns be considered. The site will be served by the Sparks Fire Department, as mentioned. The applicant also submitted a fire protection plan that considers and addresses the wildland-urban interface, and that was considered to be approved by the fire chief, and that is required in the development agreement that they submit that. Finding T11 requires that any other identified impacts be considered. Landscaping and architecture will have to comply with the Sparks Municipal Code, as this has SF6 zoning. Conditions 10 and 12 respectively require that these standards be met prior to the approval of a final map. And then finally, finding T12 requires proper notice and that a public meeting be held. Again, posting of the agenda meets the noticing requirements, and this meeting qualifies as the meetings required for a tentative map. That is the end of my presentation. The applicant is here. If you have any questions for him or I, we'd be available to take those.
Thank you, Ian. Do the commissioners have any questions for staff?
I have one.
Commissioner Peterson.
When this first came before us, I had asked, and forgive me for forgetting, but this is just for my own information. Between the east boundaries of the ballparks and the west boundary of this project, can you give me that distance again?
The east boundary, I don't have that distance at this time. I don't know what that is.
I think I had it, when it first came, I asked the same thing. I'm curious because I don't suppose the lighting effects from the ball field is far enough away from that proposed development, is it?
So we can't do anything to block all of the light generated by the ball fields from this property. What we did do during the development agreement process is looked at the distance to the nearest light posts and what would be necessary to make sure that the actual bulb would be screened from those posts to the nearest houses. And I don't remember all of the distances included in that, but the applicant, as you can see in this, has it's kind of hard to see here, but there's a setback area because there's the street and then there's an open space area that we require them to have to give us some more setback. They can plant that with trees and provide a little more ability to screen some of that light from the adjacent ball fields. And so it was thought about, it was considered, and the requests we made have been followed, but off the top of my head right now, I could not tell you the distance between those two.
It's my opinion, to the benefit of the developer, that it'd be better for it to see, especially those lots on that west side, for sales, see if they could shelter that somewhat, because I lived next to a ballpark one time, and I had swing shift, and it was miserable, believe me. The other thing is the question to follow up on is, I had noticed now when you indicated that portion of floodplain with their petition, I also noticed that your reserved, your secondary fire trail was going to go right through the corner of that floodplain. Is that not true?
The road also travels near that floodplain. You can see it coming in here, them pulling that side out, and the road will actually be built up to keep it out of the floodplain as well. And so both of those things will be accomplished. But this is the only area in the actual development that's being addressed through the Clomar. I believe there's some additional area for the road that'll be addressed that way as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Commissioner Blanco.
I apologize if I'm mistaken, but I'm not seeing any mention of the approval of the Clomar and the conditions of approval.
Is it hydrological
Is it?
report?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's part of that.
Condition 7.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Any other questions? Commissioner Carey? I know
I
you
don't
have
any
questions.
questions.
No?
Questions, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Can the applicant come up?
Hi, good evening. Clay Jensen with Wingfield, Nevada, the owner of Foothills at Wingfield. Madam Chair, Commissioners, I appreciate it. And following the lead of earlier, Ian did a great job describing the issues at hand. And I was going to clarify actually the note about the condition of approval for the Clomar. And just for sake of clarity, the development agreement modification that was just approved by City Council allowed us the ability to submit and get the tentative map approved prior to the Clomar being approved by FEMA, as long as that Clomar application was into FEMA. The condition related to the final map, as we understand it, is that we will need to have FEMA approval of the Clomar before the final map is approved. And so the goal is to submit the final map for review while that FEMA review is underway, so that before the final map can come back to the City Council for approval, we will have that FEMA approval.
Thank you. Do any of the commissioners have questions for the applicant? Yes, Commissioner.
Regardless of what, that fire road coming in there will still be elevated on that floodplain, right?
That's exactly right. We actually altered the location 4 or 5 times to stay away from the flood zone. So it's considered an all-weather access, meaning that it cannot be inundated during a flood.
Would you happen to know the distance between your west boundary and the ballpark?
I'm going to give you an estimate. I
Please.
believe from the closest ball field light to the closest wall of a house is probably around 180 feet.
That much?
Yeah, you got a drainage channel, well, you got some landscape, a drainage channel, a roadway, and then 40-foot common element, and then a block wall. And the development agreement does actually require us to install landscaping along that boundary of a certain height. So we actually have site visibility requirements that show the ball field lights. And so those trees when we sell the home have to get to a certain height so that it does provide some shading for that boundary.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for the applicant or staff? Commissioner Carey?
I have no questions, thank you.
All right, bring it back to the commission. Any further discussion, a motion? I'll entertain a motion.
I guess I'll
Go
go.
ahead, Blair.
I move to forward I move to forward to City Council a recommendation of approval of the tentative map associated with PCN 19-0038 for 454 lot, single-family subdivision on a site 65 acres in size located in the SF6 zoning district, adopting findings T1 through T12 and the facts supporting these findings as set forth in the staff report, and subject to the conditions of approval 1 through 14.
I'll second.
We have a motion by Commissioner Blako and a second by Commissioner Peterson. Any further discussion? Okay, go ahead and take a vote. All those in favor state by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you, Ian. Okay, next, we have the selection of a commissioner to serve as a first alternate on the Truckee Meadows Regional Planning Commission, effective immediately from the following pool of applicants: Scott Carey, Frank Peterson, Evan Pritzo. I'll get your name right.
Oh, perfect, you got it.
Pritzos, and Mike Ralston. And Commissioner Carey had expressed an interest. Is there any other discussion, or?
I'd like to make a motion.
Go ahead, Commissioner Blako.
I'd like to nominate Commissioner Carey for the first alternate on Truckee Meadows Regional Planning Commission, effective immediately.
Thank you. We have a second?
Second.
A motion by Commissioner Blako and a second by Commissioner Pritzos. I'll get it eventually. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you. Next, we have the election of a Sparks Planning Commission chairperson for 2020 from the following pool of applicants: David Blako, Scott Carey, Frank Peterson, Evan Pritzos, Mike Ralston, Shelley Reed, and Diane Vanderwell.
Ms. Vice Chair, it's my pleasure to nominate Commissioner Reed for the chair.
I'd like to second that as well.
Thank you. We have a motion by Commissioner Peterson and a second by Commissioner Blako. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Thank you. It would be an honor to serve next year. Next, we have the election of a Sparks Planning Commission Vice Chairperson for the 2020 from the following pool of applicants: David Blako, Scott Carey, Frank Peterson, Evan Pritzos, Mike Ralston, Shelley Reed, and Diane Vanderwell. We have a motion. I understand that Commissioner Peterson was interested in serving as vice chair. I didn't know if there was any other interest, so I'll entertain a motion.
I would like to make a motion.
Go ahead, Commissioner
I would like to
Blako.
nominate Frank Peterson as the vice chairperson for 2020 Sparks Planning Commission, sorry.
Thank you. We have a motion in the second. Thank you. So we have a motion by Commissioner Blako and a second by Commissioner Pritzos. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you. Next, we are opening up to general public comment. And are there any members of the public that would like to speak? Seeing none, I will close public comment and move on to announcements from staff and commissioners.
There are no announcements on the part of staff.
Thank you. And I would like to reiterate that I'm very honored to be serving next year or this year as your chairperson. So I look forward to that. Any other comments?
Yeah, Madam Vice Chair, I just wanted to congratulate you on your election. I think you're going to be a great chair. Thank you for the support over the past couple months. It's been a real honor to be a chair of the Planning Commission for the past year, and I sincerely thank staff for all their hard work. And I wanted to just put that out there and thank everyone and congratulate you. And big thank you to the staff for allowing me to attend tonight's meeting by phone. It wasn't ideal. I apologize I wasn't able to be there, but I appreciate the effort and allowing me to participate in tonight's meeting.
Thank you, Commissioner Carey. Any other comments? No, with that, I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you.